Hello. We are here. We're live.
Some of us
Hello,
are
everyone.
queer. We're ready to talk.
And we're ready to talk. Hello,
Hi.
everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those who have already done so, we have a few people on LinkedIn, a few people on YouTube. Feel free to post questions in your chat. Note that if you're on LinkedIn and you post questions in your chat, we can't type back to you, but if you're on YouTube, we can. So enjoy. All right. Hi, welcome.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here.
Me
Um,
too. I've been
I
happy
had
all
my
day.
background muted so you couldn't see my delightful kitchen, but you can now.
We
And I
can
cooked
know.
an amazing stew last night, so you can see the
That's
detritus of that.
exciting. Amazing. Well, for anyone watching, Maya is one of my besties, so we're going to have a great time today. But why, Maya, why don't we start with you telling everyone who you are?
Okay, fabulous. Um, I am her pronouns. And I was and am transitioning out of being the co founder, chief operations officer, and chief compliance officer at Adasina Social Capital. I say I'm transitioning out of that because Adasina is in a very, very exciting transitionary moment in which we are going to be moving to employee ownership. And actually, I am in the process of selling that business to my employees, which is beyond thrilling. And I'm starting a consulting firm with my business partner, Rachel Robasciotti, who's been my business partner now. This is our third company together
Wow.
called Lyria Consulting. So if you have any operational or exciting compliance or executive needs, Lyria Consulting can help you.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, that's exciting that Rachel is joining you in this consulting endeavor as well. That should be
I
fun
just
as
don't do
usual.
anything without Rachel. It's just a bad
You can't.
idea in my life. I figured out just don't do business without Rachel. It works for me.
Nope. I think that's always a positive and smart choice. All right. Well, what do you want to talk about today? You want to go get in
Well,
trouble? Do you have some specific topics? Do we just
I
want to throw out hot
do.
takes so that everyone yells at us? Like, what do you want to do?
I mean, I got a lot of hot takes. Most of them are about romance novels. But I actually want to talk about a project that you and I started and did that didn't end up necessarily ending how we thought it would, which I think is a good thing to talk about just as people who are consultants. And, I'm transitioning more in a consulting role. You've been more in a consulting role. And, people talk a lot about the kind of wins and the magic things you can do as a consultant. And this was an interesting project because it didn't end up the way that we thought that it was going to end up. And I think that's an important story to be told also. So I want to talk a little bit about Project Luthen because we are
Let,
everywhere. We are
let's
everywhere.
talk about how we were thinking about trying to take some of this stuff international. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you
All
want
right.
to give a little background about how kind of we started this project and how you roped me in?
Yeah, so I've been working for a long time with a group of international financial advisors, and we started looking to think how could we create a uh, kind of a global co-op of financial advisors
Hmm.
who, in various different countries, who could be a one-stop shop for expats.
Hmm.
And not obviously, we're not going to figure out the hundred something countries that exist, right? We kind of focused on the kind of Western style financial advice countries, right? So
Right.
Commonwealth countries and other ones that have similar kind of structures to the
Hmm.
U.S., the U.K., Australia, and the places also where people tend to move back and forth between countries.
Right. So a
Right
lot of
now,
English speaking countries to be
a lot of
kind
English
of
speaking countries,
specific
yeah,
about
for
it.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
We all tend to have similar laws and regulations.
Hmm.
Or if we're talking about, Dubai or something, then there's no laws and regulations. But other
Makes
than
it
what
easy
happens
in a
here,
certain sense, we found out. Makes it
it
easy.
does makes it easy and hard at the same time, right? There
Exactly.
are no rules.
Exactly.
Are you sure? Because there are rules. You just don't get to know what they are in advance.
They're more like guidelines that are not written down but are very, very
Yeah,
serious.
yeah. If you do these things, you won't piss off the wrong people, and then you're fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so we are trying to figure out how we could group this stuff together, because right now at the lower end of the kind of expat um, financial advice world, you tend to have firms that are just two countries, You know, it might be the
Mhm.
US and the UK, or Australia and the US, or Australia and the UK, or it tends to be a one-to-one, or maybe, you know, one firm might handle 3 countries, right? They're like, "Oh, we
Right.
do US, Canada, and the UK," or something like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I was thinking, look, people are all over the world. What if they could find a place where one advisor or one organization at least could handle those people who have either multiple countries, or just want to go to one place just in case they're going to move again, right? Because
Right.
you might be a UK citizen, you get placed in Dubai, then you get placed in India, then you get placed in Australia, then you get placed in the US, and you just keep moving
Mhm.
around because that's the nature of your work.
Right. And one of the things
Um,
I found interesting about that as a concept is that this absolutely totally exists at the ultra, ultra high net wealth
yeah.
level. Like,
Hmm.
you can go to Royal Bank of Scotland, you could go to the very high levels of like JP Morgan, and they have these international banking and these international, they'll help you own real estate. It exists, but it really exists for the, what do you say, 50 million plus kind of
Yeah, I'd say
family.
you have to bring the bank $10 million.
Right.
You bring the
So
bank
that's liquid
$10 million, you're
asset.
covered. So your net
Right.
worth is probably triple that, or something.
Easily. And
Yeah.
so when something that we talk about in the US, which is where, my background is as a professional, not my personal background, but my professional background, we talk about kind of like this mass affluent market. And I'm sitting right now in San Francisco, California, which is kind of the home of mass affluent with all of our tech money. And so the idea that there's this international kind of mass affluent class that we could potentially help multinationally was really interesting to me.
Yeah. And so that piece we were trying to figure out what at least the first steps would be,
Mhm.
to building that kind of structure, and in particular, the regulatory issues, because those are the ones I tried working with. I wanted to work with an Australian client when I was still an advisor, and like trying to get that through compliance took 6 months, and they still never gave me an answer
Mhm.
on like when would we have to register in Australia.
Mhm.
And my Australian lawyers and my US lawyers eventually just kind of threw up their hands and were like, we don't actually know. Like, you're an
That's
Australian compliance lawyer. How do you not know? They're like, because that rule doesn't exist, but the rules around it kind of exist. So, like,
Mhm.
you're going to find out when someone yells at you.
Right. Which is one
And
of the really frustrating things about compliance. And I've spent a lot of my career as a compliance semi-professional, though I am a chief
well,
compliance officer now. And a lot of it is you keep your nose clean, you try hard to prove that you're not actually lying, cheating, or stealing, and then you kind of throw up your hands and hope for the best because often countries, including the US with the SEC, they like to sort of regulate in retrospect, where they decide later that something wasn't a good idea and are like, oh, that's now illegal. And you're like, ooh, great, but I could have actually avoided that if you had just told me.
yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing I've noticed with compliance is like you might get in trouble and you might even get a fine, if you do something regulatorily wrong, but if you didn't actually harm your client, then you're probably still going to be okay.
Absolutely. And something that I tell people in my own firm and that I tell the people that I consult with is I'm like, okay, if you're not actually stealing your client's money, if you're actually doing something in what you believe is their best interest and you can document it and you're not lying to them, like you're pretty much covered. There's kind of like no real basis for any regulatory action. Like maybe you didn't actually file all the paperwork correctly and maybe it's hard to prove, but if you just don't lie, cheat, or steal, your chances of getting in any trouble are really low.
Yeah, I mean, you might get a compliance ding on your U4 or something, and
Hmm.
you might get publicly in trouble. That's the risk, but you're not going to get shut down, which is,
Hmm.
the only thing that, as a firm owner or a past firm owner, that's what I was afraid of. Big fines,
Absolutely.
getting shut down, because everything else you can survive.
Absolutely. And that is something that we found true in the research that I did for the project that we were doing is that kind of, even though there are very different, it turns out, very different compliance and regulatory structures in the countries that we looked at, that kind of basis of like, just don't do shady things is pretty much true the world over.
Yeah, and I think also, document how you're not doing shady things.
Definitely.
Because if you're not documenting, that looks shady in and of itself. So as long as you
True.
document every step, document, concurrently with the decision why you did it,
Hmm.
then when they're coming in to read why you did it, they're like, oh, yeah, you did the wrong thing, but I can see you did it for the right reasons, and then you're
Absolutely.
likely to get in way less trouble.
Yeah, and with the current technology, just even in the last year, the last 6 months, like, documenting has become so much easier. I
So
mean,
easy.
it really used to be, when I entered the industry 25 odd years ago, just the notes that we would take for meetings would take as long as the meetings itself. But now with the
Easy.
technological tools that we have, it's so much easier. And there's really no excuse now, I feel like, for people not to properly document their meetings.
Absolutely. So there you go. If you're watching this wondering about compliance, or we take a little clip out of this just to talk about compliance, we'll clip out that piece. Just don't steal from your clients. Lots of documentation, 99% covered on compliance.
Very, very true. Very true.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless
Um,
there is a rule that you ignore, and then you get in big trouble.
yeah, don't
Right.
do that. Don't
Yeah,
do
that's
that.
like
But
then you
since
get your speeding ticket. It doesn't matter. Right.
Yeah, but since most of the rules are involving not lying, cheating, or stealing,
You're pretty good.
yeah, just
Yeah.
don't do those things. Yeah,
Absolutely. But obviously, going across countries, now you did all the work on this project around compliance, right? In terms of
absolutely.
all the different compliance regimes.
Mhm,
So I think it would be really interesting for people to understand some of the differences in that you found out, obviously not
mhm.
comprehensively because we didn't get that far, but um, in uh, in the various kind of UK, Australia, Middle East, Ireland, Europe,
Mhm.
other places, kind of what some of the interesting compliance differences are.
Absolutely. Yeah. So JD, as he said, he was working with this consortium, and we had this kind of like idea to say, what would it take to start this sort of multinational kind of firm? Um, and then JD, you grabbed me because you're like, hey, you're a compliance and operational professional, and I don't want to do this research. Maya will do this
No
research for
one
me.
wants me to do that kind of research.
I know. Um,
You don't
y'all,
let a
listeners,
pirate into the treasury. I'm
oh
not the
Lord,
person to
I
do
am
it for
sorry
sure.
to tell the listeners that I had so much fun. I had so much fun. I'm really sorry. Like my nerd badge is clear. I'm like, I had
Yes.
so much fun. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what it would take to actually do this, because I think at the end of this, even though it didn't get put into fruition, we did kind of have a roadmap, at least from an operational perspective. And to create that roadmap, we kind of separated the world into chunks, as you were talking with JD. So we had one chunk that was the European Union. And then we had another chunk that was, we'll call them Commonwealth countries that are not European Union countries, and that actually includes the UK. So we're talking about Canada, Australia, interestingly, countries like Singapore that draw a huge amount of their um,
Mhm.
law from the UK, and then Australia. And then we have another chunk that's kind of like the US, and then there's everybody else. And everybody else, I'm just going to let you know, is just a big wild, wild west. So we didn't even get there.
Yeah.
Um, so the first chunk that we looked at was the European Union. And again, that's the European Union X the UK, because Brexit is a thing. Shouldn't have been a thing, but is a thing.
It's a big thing.
Um, and we're looking at countries that are basically pretty much part of the monetary union, because if you're in part of the monetary union, you're really all in. There's countries that are not part of the monetary union and that still have a lot of the regulation. Sweden is probably one of the biggest there. And so they kind of have more of their own regulation. But if you're part of the monetary union, we can deal with you quite easily. Um, the first thing that we found out, which was very, very interesting to me, is there's no de minimis exemption like there is in the US. Do you think people are familiar with state de minimis exemptions, JD, or should I go over this?
Give it a minute. I think most
Okay.
people probably are. They all pass the 65. If you're watching this, if you didn't pass the 65, that's probably a little strange, or you're working on it now, I assume. But I do have friends that
So,
tell me they watch this show, and I'm like, why? Like, they're like, because you're
right, because
awesome.
we're talking
So
about
maybe.
such interesting things. Yeah, we are awesome, but still, y'all. Yeah. So we're a federated republic in the US. We have 50 states. Let's not talk about Puerto Rico. Should be 51. Um, And in each of those states, technically, we have something that accounts for state securities, regulatory agencies, and we also have citizens that are citizens of all of our country, even though they live in different states. And so it's very common to have a client who you start working with in Arkansas and they move to Florida. And so as a US registered advisor, you have to do what's called a notice filing if you're SEC registered, or an actual state registration if you're state registered in any state where you generally, except for Texas and Louisiana, generally have more than 5 clients. So if you are in Arkansas and you have one client that moves to Florida, you're like, oh, well, oops, I don't need to tell Florida anything because I'm registered in Arkansas. It's what's called a de minimis exemption. We're going into the European Union with the idea that there might be something like a de minimis exemption. If we're registered in Hungary and we had 2 clients in France, then it didn't matter. We didn't have to register in France. That just does not exist. You must be registered everywhere.
Yeah. Amazing. Because like you'd think like that they'd look at that and say, well, obviously we need to have some sort of de minimis, because if
Yeah.
people can move from Hungary to France on a whim because of all the, it's all a union, why not have freedom of regulation on some level?
Nope. And the other thing we found out that's quite interesting is that it doesn't actually matter the citizenship of your clients. It matters where they're living. So if you have a client who is Hungarian and they are living in France, as they have the legal right to do, they fall under French law, not Hungarian law, which all of the laws are, again, slightly different. So if you want to basically have one client in of the European Union countries, you need a firm that is registered in the European Union, and it has to be registered also in every country that that client is in, including if they move between them.
Right. So then you have one client, you might theoretically have 4 different registrations you have to do for one client or more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because let's say your client is Hungarian and has a family property in Hungary, but they're working in France, but they have a trust that they inherited that falls under German law. You could potentially, just with that one client, be registered in 3 different countries.
Exactly.
So that kind of looked like an overwhelming problem to solve.
Yeah.
But then we come to our friends who love harps and Guinness and speak English. And those friends are the Republic of Ireland.
Oh, we love the Irish.
We do love the Irish. So it turns out that Ireland's place, and the place they've kind of pulled for themselves in the European Union, is one where they have become like a business-friendly country.
And like why everyone puts registers their corporations in Delaware. Or
oh yeah, absolutely.
South Dakota or whatever.
Absolutely. Ireland wants you to do business in Ireland. And all of the European funds are also registered in Ireland. And a lot of major European Union companies have headquarters in Ireland because Ireland wants your business. So bizarrely, the key to the European Union is not actually having clients that are necessarily European Union citizens. It's actually having a registered investment advisor that is registered in Ireland.
Right. So what does that allow? I actually don't remember the details. What does that allow us to do? Does it allow us to not register in those other countries because it's like kind of a hub, or how does that? It's a
It does.
So explain that.
Yeah. So if you have an RIA that's registered in Ireland, you fall under basically the equivalent of the Irish SEC laws, which have been basically stamped and certified by the European Union because they say Ireland meets the standards. And that allows you to do the equivalent of being an SEC registered advisor in the US that notice files in those states. So if
you still have to notice file to all those countries, just not full registration.
Correct. And the notice filing is not that bad because they're all using the same set of notice filing I'll just call them notice filing registrations, whereas the laws for registering, I'm going to call them RIAs, even though they're not. The laws for creating an RIA are huge differences between, let's say, France and Hungary, because those laws were put in place before the European Union. But we'll call them notice filing is the same because the laws came later.
It's like a
So
common application for going to college or whatever.
exactly, exactly. So if you pick a country like Ireland that is very business friendly, that wants your financial firm, that has laws that you kind of understand because they're all in English as opposed to Hungarian, which I personally don't read or speak,
Okay.
you can create the equivalent of an SEC registered entity, except it's a European Union registered RIA entity. And then you can use that, as you said, common application to notice file in all of those countries that are part of that union.
Right. So we solved that problem on the EU, but of course, then there's another benefit to being in Ireland, right?
There's a huge benefit, which is that Ireland, well, it's not a benefit to the Irish people, but it was conquered by the UK for longer than I know, because I'm not up on my Irish European history. I'm not that kind of white person. And so their laws are A, in English, and B, are modeled after the UK's laws, which formed the basis of all of the Commonwealth countries' laws. And there's a reciprocal, I wouldn't say agreement, I would say handshake deal between the UK and Ireland. They are cousins, even though they fight with each other horrifically.
Yes.
So if you want to have a RIA, we'll call it, in Ireland, and then you also want to have one in the UK, it's not that hard. You can use a very similar set of data, very similar laws, very similar even sort of application process if you want to headquarter your company in London and also in Dublin.
Yeah, or theoretically, like right at the Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland border, you can just have two offices across the street from each other.
So we actually found Irish companies that set that up for you.
Yep.
Because they know that people want to do this.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so you can
Easy.
literally kind of hire, and we would call it, for like in the US, it would be an agent for server of process or a registration agent. But you can hire the Irish and UK equivalent, and they'll just set you up, one on each side of the border.
Easy peasy.
And once you have a entity that is registered in the UK, going to Commonwealth countries, specifically Canada and Australia, is not that bad.
New Zealand, pretty easy too, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. So they don't exactly, it's not as easy as notice filing, but they do this thing where they accept your registration. Basically, they fast track you. They're like, oh, okay, mama said you were fine. And even though we hate her and she's dead now, we still like think that you're a real person with a real company.
Exactly. Yeah. You come in with a letter of introduction, even if it's from someone I don't like, I know that at least you're not just some rando.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So it does give you a leg up. It's not as big of a leg up as it used to be, that I will say. I found out that particularly in Australia, they used to kind of in the past just accept the registration. Now you have to rely on some exemptions and you have to register, but they're still going to treat you better.
Yeah, 7 years ago, Australia did a big, for those who don't know, had a huge change in their regulatory system for financial
Hmm.
advisors. Like, I mean, unbelievably drastic changes
Hmm.
that have really, they're still grappling with some of those changes there. All my Australian clients are still in this, like, just trying to figure out how it all works.
Hmm.
And it created a lot of chaos for a lot of people, a lot of firms, and so a lot of people got out of the business. It was a lot, so it's not surprising that they're a little harder to register now, but just because the
Yeah.
rules are so different.
Canada's quite easy though, just
Yeah.
FYI. Canada's
Hmm.
quite easy. Singapore is a little bit different. You actually have to have a physical office located in Singapore. But once you get that, the registration is not that hard.
Right.
Um, and then there's the US, which doesn't really accept
Anything?
exemptions. They
No,
don't
we
really
just
accept anything.
we
No.
we don't play nice with others as we see in the news.
Yes, exactly. I think about it as kind of like my family. I do have family in Europe, and some of my family in Sweden are doctors, and if who have lovely Swedish medical degrees, which I think anyone would agree are fully capable of being doctors. And if they come to the US is like, no, you have to go to medical school again. I'm like, really, really? It's not like they got a by mail degree. Like, come on.
And it's so easy to blame the current administration for a lot of this kind of stuff, but let's be real, this is true no matter who's in office, and
It's true,
what
though.
who's
I'm
in
happy to
power.
blame the current administration
I,
just for
I think we
funsies.
should blame them for, I catch a cold, I blame the current administration,
Sounds perfect.
but I think, even if we transformed that and got back to some sense of normalcy around how we operate on the international stage, our tax system and our regulatory system isn't going to be more open. Um,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
that's
Well,
that.
that's interesting you noted because one of the things that we found out is that in this scheme, you don't really want US clients.
Sure. Yeah, they're definitely harder to deal with. I mean, particularly from a tax perspective, and that makes
Mostly
it
from
much
a
harder.
tax perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, when we were looking at this, it was really functional for clients who were European Union citizenship. I'll call them
Mhm.
European Union adjacent
Yeah.
citizenship, Sweden, Switzerland. Um, and then it worked fine for Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders. But the US is kind of a mess because they tax their citizens worldwide and it's
Right.
just kind of ugly.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that doesn't mean there's not opportunity to work with those people and help them on some level. It means you can charge higher fees just because it's more complicated,
Hmm.
and there are credits and there are ways to do things with their tax money, and there's
Hmm.
all sorts of ways that tax attorneys can earn lots of fees for sure.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely creates a little bit more chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was a fun project to do. And we did
Hmm.
pretty much figure it out. I mean, I talked about it from the regulatory standpoint, which was fun. But do you want to talk about some of the things that we found just sort of from a marketing perspective also?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier from a marketing perspective. Nobody else does it at this
Hmm.
level of integration around the world,
Yeah.
outside of the big global banks. But there's not the equivalent of like the fee only RIA that can do, um, I think, pretty much anywhere that
Hmm.
can do multiple country global citizen kind of expats, as opposed to, hey, I'm a US person, I'm going to the UK, and then I'm coming back in 10 years. Like that
Right.
exists. And there's plenty of those firms out there. Some are absolutely fantastic, and I trust them a
Hmm.
lot and I know them well. But once you get beyond 2 or 3 countries, it just doesn't exist. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who want to be global citizens and are like, I'm out.
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
just kind of cruising and bouncing around. There's a huge population of those people that just can't be helped.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you want to talk about maybe the client personas that we kind of came up with for this firm? I think maybe people would
oh, I
find that
do, but I
interesting.
don't remember what they all were. So you're gonna have to prompt me, and then we'll
Okay.
go.
So the first one was these international families.
Mhm. And so these are the families that uh, maybe they're living in Canada, they have assets in India and Australia, and then one of their kids moved to the UK for school, and so they have these kind of threads around in a bunch of different countries, right?
Right. And we found a lot of those where there's like an originating, we'll call them like a grandparent, and they started, and they were probably, upper middle class in their country of origin. I think India is a great example.
Yeah.
And so they sent their kids um, internationally for school, and then the kids got stranded, I'll say. And so they have one kid in the UK, they have one kid in Australia, and then they started having families, and some of
Yeah.
those grandchildren are now back in India. But everybody's kind of spread through the world, though usually, again, threads of language and threads of culture.
Yep. Now, one of the primary places we were looking for this also was in Dubai,
Hmm.
um, and Singapore as well, to a lesser
Hmm.
extent. But one, it's because I knew a guy in Dubai who I thought would be a really good fit for this kind of service model, and um, but that ends up being this kind of immigration hub. And I think there's
Exactly.
probably 2 or 3 other big immigration hubs around the world where lots of countries send people, and so you have this kind of big multicultural and multi-ethnic, and multi-regulatory systems all in one place.
Exactly.
Obviously, Dubai doesn't have tax, so everyone who's not an American is stoked to go work there because they don't have to
Mhm.
pay any tax at all ever.
Right.
Obviously, Americans get taxed anyway, and it doesn't help them at all because
Right.
the only
Yeah.
benefit you get working overseas as an American is you get a foreign tax credit. So if you pay tax there, you don't have to pay tax here. But if you go to someplace with no tax, that doesn't help you at all.
Yes, this is why people renounce their citizenship. Yeah, so that was kind of our second. That was kind of our second client persona, which was like the world. It was like the world traveling professional, and
Yeah.
they don't necessarily have the problem that our international families did, which is where they have multiple generations in multiple countries and might own property or have assets in multiple countries. They have the problem that they grew up usually in one country, are working in another country, may plan to retire to a third country. Sometimes they're the children of our international families, but sometimes they're not.
Yep. Absolutely. And probably they have income streams from at least three countries, if not more. Just
Exactly.
because they're working with clients internationally everywhere.
Right.
And sometimes it's easier to leave your money in that country as opposed to trying to get everything in one place. So they
Right.
might have, bank accounts with 14 different currencies theoretically.
Easily, easily. And they're usually high income earners. We were thinking that our international families, they had assets, sometimes physical assets in multiple countries,
Yeah.
but our international professionals, what they had is a lot of income flowing in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
And
and
then
then,
real estate would be for the big families. I think real estate is another giant issue
mhm,
because your international traveler, professional person doesn't have real estate anywhere other than home, probably is renting everywhere because they keep moving around. But those
definitely.
international families, you have real estate owned in five different countries, and then you start inheriting real estate in another country from where you live.
Right.
And I mean, I had that even with just my kind of regular old
Hmm.
vanilla clients. Like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, no, I came here from the UK and now I own a flat in Scotland.
Hmm.
Do I need to pay tax there? You know what I mean? So like even at kind of the basic service model for just an American client, because most of the people watching this are probably American,
Hmm.
advisors.
Hmm.
Um, they have that they have that one complication,
Right.
right? Where
Hmm.
I think part of the other thing that we were really thinking about from this kind of consortium of, because obviously you're going to have multiple registered advisors, although it might be
Hmm.
owned by one, it might be owned by a group. Like how we figured that out was still, open to discussion. But
Dubai free zones. I figured out
right,
some of it. Ask me later.
exactly. But even a firm in the US who might need a solution could then
Hmm.
go to this group and say, hey, I have a client like this. How can you
Right.
help me? And so it
Right.
could also be kind of an outsourced provider of expat services for non-expat firms.
Absolutely. And that was kind of our last client persona as well, which we called kind of the aspirational citizens. So these are
Sure.
the people who want to be digital nomads, or they want they're retirees who want to retire to another country. And, whether they'll actually do it or not is kind of a separate issue, but they need knowledge.
Well, and I think that was, when we were talking about those people, I think that that population is very large.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of people in America who would be very interested in in that kind of service in the current moment because everyone's like, how do I get out of here? You know what I mean?
Right.
And some of the interesting services that we were looking at, like how would that differ from just being an American advisor who knows a lot
Hmm.
about how to move to Portugal or whatever? But it involved like, oh, we'd want to have, for example, immigration attorneys,
Right.
not necessarily on staff, but well linked, so that if someone
Hmm.
says, "Hey, I'm a Canadian, I want to move to Hungary," we're like, "Okay, here is the person that's going to be able to help you figure that out."
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
that's the biggest issue on some level. It's like how to get there is one thing, or like what you do financially once you're there is one thing, but how to get there in a way that they let you in is a whole other one.
It is, it is. And, again, I think we never quite figured out how to price those services, but I
No,
think
not
there's
yet.
a
Yeah.
huge number of people who would purchase those services. How many people actually would execute on them is a much smaller percentage. But the ones that did, then they become clients. Because, for instance, if you want like a golden visa in Malta, you have to purchase real estate in Malta, which means
Yeah,
you now own real estate in Malta. And what are you
exactly.
going to do if you don't actually intend to live in Malta with your golden visa? You actually intend to live in France with your Maltese citizenship, but you still own real estate in Malta. So then you become a client, but the people who I think are willing to pay for a knowledgeable service that would explain their options to them, whether they execute on those options or not, is probably pretty big.
Yeah, absolutely. And at some level, it just means that some of your clients, if you're operating under the service model, aren't necessarily international expats. They're
Right.
people who might want to be someday. And they're like, well, if it's the same price to choose an advisor in Canada
Hmm.
who can be your advisor and they're just a Canadian advisor, or you hire an advisor in Canada who knows how to take you to any other country in the world that you want to go to, and it's the same price prior to actually then consuming those services for immigration or whatever, which would probably be an add-on, I would expect, for most
Hmm.
firms. Um, it gives you a niche that you don't actually have to execute on for a lot of
Right.
people. They just
Hmm.
like the idea that you have that capability,
Hmm.
even if you never use it.
Hmm.
And um, I think there's a lot of those services that sometimes financial advisors have, that niche that's like, uh, I want someone who specializes in this, not necessarily because I need it now, but I might do that, and I want to make sure I don't have to change advisors at that point.
Hmm.
Or I want an advisor who's good for my kids, so I'm picking someone who's more appropriate for them later than maybe
Hmm.
for me now.
Yeah.
And so that kind of adding that kind of service model is definitely key for that sort of thing.
I think so. And I think that also, there's this old thing where like 20% of your clients cause 80% of the trouble. It's like having those resources so that those 20% of your clients, you actually have them to somewhere to go, because
Yeah,
it can be incredibly disruptive for an American based advisor if one of their clients actually, ends up owning property, as you noted, in Scotland, and they ask you the question and you're the advisor and you need to be you need to know. They ask you, like, do I have to pay taxes? Like, I mean, telling your clients you don't know does build trust, but after a while you gotta know. And so
well, yeah, it builds trust when you say, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. It doesn't build
right.
trust when you're like, eh,
Right.
and that's the
So
end. Like, but what do I
you need
do?
a way to
You're
figure it
like,
out.
maybe some Google, check, ask Claude. Like,
Hmm.
that's not the acceptable answer, right? Not for a
No.
client who's
Mm-mm.
sophisticated, for sure.
No,
Yeah,
no.
that's
Um, yeah,
there you go.
that would be ugly. That would be ugly.
That
Um,
would be very silly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I am hoping, so to kind of finish the story for our listeners here, we kind of prepared a lot of this and did a lot of research with the idea that there would be a firm that would kind of start this consortium, that would start this international firm, and we would be
Yeah,
hired to help enact that. And just with some of the wars and the political situation, the timing wasn't right. And so, in a
right.
certain sense, as consultants, this was a failed consulting project because no one actually hired us or reimbursed us for the time that we
Yeah,
spent.
exactly.
But I mean, that happens sometimes, and I increased my knowledge and I got to work with
Totally.
you.
And the research is done. So, like, at some point, one of us is going to meet someone who's like, you know what I wish I could do? And we're going to be like, ha ha, boy, do we
Ha!
have an answer for you. Um, and it's kind of the consulting lifestyle, right?
Mhm,
So,
mhm,
for all those people who are wondering what, someone like me or Maya do all day, my billable consulting work is probably 30-40% of my time,
mhm.
right? The rest of my time, I'm just some people would just say I'm playing around, making weird stuff and seeing what works.
Well, that
And
is true. And
and then hopefully you're able to do something with it someday.
Mhm,
I have probably, if I'm doing a lot of software development now for myself and just kind of creating prototypes and thinking of stuff. I'm about to launch my new job board. I'm working on stuff on the side, and at some point, I'm like, oh, I created this thing. Oh, who actually needs that is that person.
mhm,
And then we
mhm.
go to them and say, hey, look what we built. You interested in paying us for it? And that happens all the time. And I think that's kind of the nature of being a good consultant, is figuring out solutions for people that you don't know who have the problem yet.
I agree with that. And I also agree that gathering knowledge, particularly in your area of expertise, which for me again is operations and compliance and administration, is never a bad thing. Now when people ask me tangential questions, I'm like, hi, I actually know something about that.
Oh, I
And
know.
maybe just enough to be dangerous, which is always something you got to pay attention to. But I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed increasing my knowledge, and that is never time wasted.
No, no, definitely. Never.
Mhm.
Never, never. It's a great,
And
my ADHD always thanks me because, in previous roles, I'd get into hyperfocus and I spent 200 hours learning about something that is completely not relevant to my role.
mhm,
And everyone's like, why did you miss that deadline? I'm like, sorry, I just was looking at too many composting toilets. You know what I mean? That's
mhm,
just what the nature of the world. Sorry. I looked at composting toilets for 200 hours and now I'm basically a plumber.
mhm.
Um, and so that happens. And in consulting, that's a net positive, right? Because now I know stuff and now I can do more things.
You
Um,
know, for all of you listeners out there, I do not have ADD. I spend a lot of time with people who do have ADD, and they just tell me I'm just made up of executive function. Like all I am is executive function. So
you are, yeah, for sure.
yeah, I'm all executive function. And
Yes.
so I think that I enjoy all of my colleagues and friends who, I call it like the popcorn brain. It just pops all over the
Yep.
place. I'm
Hey,
just
look,
like, all the pieces. I'm like, it's all the pieces. It's great. It's
you
great.
want to learn more about tractors today? I just bought 20 acres up in right outside Portland, and so all of my time is spent looking at tractors and excavators. And I don't need any of these things, right? That property is just fine. It does not
Mhm.
need a tractor nor an excavator. It's not a farm. It's totally fine. And yet, I'm looking at building off-grid houses, with 20%
Right.
of my time.
Well, my godsons are 8 and 4, and they would tell you you need both a tractor and an excavator. And they could probably tell you exactly what type you needed because that's how little boys are, it turns out. If I never see another train again in my life, I will be fine.
I There is something about my little child self that it gets it very excited when I'm watching some like video about a 1-ton excavator and it's
Oh my
small enough that it
gosh.
feels like I could use that thing easy. It's not one of the big ones. Big ones, I'm like, that's a little much for me. But they have these little 1-ton ones that are like the size of a golf cart, and you're like, I want that. Like, I want to drive 2 miles an hour across my field and just be like, I'm going to dig a hole right there. Why are you digging a hole? Because I have an
Because you
excavator.
can. Because you can. Because you can.
Yep.
Yeah, I do not believe in any type of gender determinism. And let me tell you, I do not need to dig random holes at all. That's not a thing that I need. I'm very secure in my gender identity. I do not need to dig random holes, but I believe in other people's desire and ability to
Oh,
dig
yeah.
random holes.
Yeah, it's not about gender. Honestly, we should just change the genders around. That really the
Mhm.
genders just mean people who want to dig random holes for no reason and people who do not.
You know what? I am down for that. I am
Right?
down for that.
Those are our new
Yeah.
gender spectrums, right? How much do you
I
like digging holes?
Right. What I do like doing is making snacks, and so I would make you themed snacks. I don't know
Right?
what excavator themed snacks are, but I could work on it.
So really what we're saying is our new genders are dwarves and hobbits, and you're somewhere
Yeah,
between the two.
basically. Um, Despite the fact that I look like an elf.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
But that's different. That's like now we're getting into three-dimensional spectrums and
Well,
you know, that's
yeah.
it all gets too
Mhm.
complicated. I'm gonna have to call my kids in to explain it to
Okay,
me.
that's fine. That's fine. So yeah, if anyone wants to start a multinational expat firm, call JD and Maya.
Yep,
We're
we
here for
figured it
you.
out already. We
We
got it
figured it
all
out.
sorted out. It's in a box, waiting for execution.
Mhm,
As soon as
mhm,
someone wants to drop some money onto it, not just for us,
mhm.
but it's. I think the reality is this is a relatively expensive endeavor, right? You're
Mm.
dealing with multiple regulations. You're going
Oh,
to drop some cash
absolutely.
to do this, so
Mhm.
this might be something you want to do right after you take that sweet, sweet private equity check.
Oh, yeah.
And then expand internationally could be a very, and if you're looking to get a really big multiple, start doing a little of this So maybe it's for some of those firms that are like, oh, I'm the US Australia firm, or I'm the UK Canada
Mhm.
firm, or I'm the Australia Dubai firm, or whatever it is, like where you
Mhm.
have one channel, multiple country. I think this would be ideal as an expansion, right? Just come in and say,
Absolutely.
oh, I already know how to do this. Adding another 10 now overnight
Mhm.
should make your valuation pop, right? Because now you're
Yeah,
unique. And that's
absolutely.
obviously always going to be a
Absolutely.
little extra
Or,
bonus.
our last kind of client persona, you decide that you want to start helping digital nomads. You want to start helping people who want to retire in other countries, who want those golden visas. And, there are some firms that I've seen, but they're more like immigration firms that do specialize in that. I haven't seen any sort of RIA firms that have chosen that as kind of a specialization. And, I think there's a huge market there to add on to a regular RIA firm.
Yeah. I've seen a few firms where the founder has decided they wanted to be a digital nomad. And so
Yes,
they get a lot of
definitely.
that expertise just personally.
Hmm.
And this would be, if you come into some money, a great way to expand and start hiring advisors in lots of different countries. If that's
Yeah.
your vibe and you want to be traveling around the world all the time, well, here's a
Mhm.
great way to make it tax deductible. That's for sure.
Truly, and especially if your clients are not US citizens, and so you don't have to deal with the US taxes. There is so many thoughtful and smart advisors outside of the US that have been trained in other countries' financial systems. They're easy to find, they're not that expensive from a US perspective. And if you're not dealing with the US tax implications because most of your clients are Canadian or most of your clients are Hungarian, because we keep picking on Hungary, you have the ability really to hire so many good local advisors.
Absolutely. I think that's very, very true. Although there's a lot of other countries where I think advisor qualifications end up being another big deal that we didn't really get too deep into.
No, we
But
didn't.
like, for example, to become a financial advisor in Australia is a lot harder than it is in the US, for example, or in New Zealand or in
Absolutely.
Canada or anywhere else. Really, I think they're
Hmm.
probably the hardest country to be a financial advisor in, because essentially, like, here, you take Series 65, you're an advisor.
Hmm.
There, you do the equivalent of getting your CFP, and then you're allowed to start being an advisor,
Hmm.
right? They have
Hmm.
their qualification restrictions are just very high. You need to basically have a master's degree.
Hmm.
It's a lot more similar to being a CPA
Right.
there, being a financial advisor, than it is here.
I'm not against that. Just
I'm not
saying.
either. It definitely is. There's a few things that are a little tricky about the way they do it that create some bottlenecks. So,
Hmm.
for example, you need to do 2 years of education, and then post all of the work you've done. You need to do a professional year.
Hmm.
Right now, I think most of the people in Australia are like, look, it'd be really helpful if you could do the education and the professional, like, experience hours at the same time, similar to how the CFP works
Right.
here. And that would make it much easier, because doing a professional year after you've done everything is like, okay, this is just now slowing everything way down. So then
Hmm.
the speed at which you can create financial advisors just goes way down.
Yeah. And I imagine there would be a benefit to putting that education into practice.
I think so. So if
Hmm.
I could wave my magic wand, that would probably alleviate a lot of the pressure on
Hmm.
finding Australian advisors, because
Hmm.
every Australian advisor I know it's just a total talent crunch. They just can't find
Yeah.
the right people. It's too hard.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All
Um,
right.
Great. Well, we're right at an hour. I don't actually know how long we're supposed to go,
As long as
but
we want, we can go an hour. A lot of times we'll go 2 hours. We'll just keep talking until we're
oh
done talking.
goodness. Oh goodness. Well, I have more meetings, so we can't go much longer.
Okay.
Do you have any checkout questions that you usually
No,
ask all of your guests?
if you have a little bit more time, I
I
would
do.
love for you to share about your experience with employee ownership and what that process was
Mm,
like. I talk to
absolutely.
advisors constantly who are saying, it'd be really cool if we could put in like an employee ownership program together.
Hmm.
And I mostly say, "Oh, I'm going to introduce you to Maya." But I think giving a sense of like what that's like, as opposed to the idea of, like, what I've done in the past, which is, okay, I'll let people buy in, and you kind of treat it like a law firm partnership
Hmm.
arrangement where they buy in, now they're an owner, and they buy some shares, and now they own
Hmm.
5%. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, is that employee ownership program? Yes, but it's
Hmm.
not a plan. It's not for
Right.
everybody. It's only for select
Hmm.
individuals, and that's the traditional way in our industry, right? That's how
Right.
most people do it, or they sell out at the end to some other, big,
Right. Hmm.
bigger firm. Or in this case, it's everyone thinks first like, oh, I'll do an ESOP or whatever. And that's
Hmm.
the only thing they've ever heard of. And they don't really know what that even means or what the implications are. But you
Right.
went in and looked at everything and probably know
Everything.
more about this than almost anybody.
Oh
So I
my
think
gosh.
some
I know
words of
so
wisdom
much
around
about it.
this would be amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, we could spend a whole other hour talking about this, and
I'm
I
ready.
unfortunately, I'm not. I'm not. But if you want to invite me back, we can have a whole one
Anytime,
about employee
anytime.
ownership. Um, the way that I look at employee ownership I'm going to talk about financial advisory and
Sure.
RIA firms, registered entities in specific, is I
That's
can
who's
kind of
watching. So
excellent. I can kind of break it down into three main, I would say, channels. Channel number one is your channel that directly impacts the tax situation of the people who are becoming owners with you. So that is any type of limited or general partner structure that spits off a K1, any type of ESOP. I'll talk a little bit about ESOPs, which spit off kind of like dividends and 1099s about why you might or might not want an ESOP. Those are those kind of structures. That's sort of like trunk number one of our three-headed tree. I don't know what I'm going with this. Trunk number two are what I'll call like the more modern versions of employee ownership, and pretty much down there is perpetual purpose trusts. But they are ways of employee ownership that do not directly impact the tax situation of the people who are becoming co-owners. And then trunk number three are things that you can't do. So it doesn't really matter,
okay. What are
because
some of those? Just so we
there
have an
are
idea.
some of those. So the SEC, when you file a form ADV1, so not the 2A, the brochure, but the ADV1, which is the questionnaire on the SEC website. I don't know if any of you have ever done that. It's not a very pleasant experience. I have done it every year for 22 years or something. There is actually a drop down list for which you pick the type of company that you are. And there's about 7 things on the drop down list. And those are the only types of company structures that the SEC allows you to be as a registered investment advisor. And cooperative is not on that list. And that is a fight that I do not suggest that people fight, even though sometimes people tell me they want to. So just don't, if you don't want to deal with it, just don't do any of the employee ownership structures that the SEC won't let you do. That includes cooperatives, it includes certain types of limited liability companies. They just don't want you to limit liability. It also includes being owned by certain like shell entities, which some people do try to do to give employees ownership in a larger entity. Just don't go there. And so you can just knock some things off of your list. So really you're dealing with two main options, things that impact the tax situation of your owners and things that don't. Why you would choose one or the other. If you choose what the things that I'm saying are impact your tax situation of your co-owners, what it allows is what it kind of boils down to is it boils down to what I will call direct ownership, in that your employee owners have some type of ledger and some type of accounting that says how much they own. It is a tangible asset for
They
them.
own LLC units. They are
Exactly.
partnership percentages, corporate
ESOP
shares.
shares.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And that I think is very, very important because it gives the employee owners a really tangible sense of what it means to be an owner of the company. The problem with it that I see is kind of twofold. One is that there is a monetary exchange. You usually have to buy in, and that is not always possible, particularly if your advisors don't come from communities that have intergenerational wealth. The other thing is that it automatically sets up a system in which some people own more.
Right.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, particularly if you're an owner who started a company and you want to keep controlling interest. But
Yep.
just know that you're perpetrating kind of capitalism stereotypes in which you are equating value to higher percentages of ownership.
Sure. So for those capitalists who want to do employee ownership, but differential, it
Mhm.
allows you to do that. as opposed to the, hey, everyone's going to own their equal share and we all kind of rise or sink all together.
Absolutely. And, the more sort of valuable, not valuable, the more, well, valuable, the easier and kind of better way to do that system is something like you were talking about, partnership shares, LLC percentages,
Yeah,
things like that. It
simple.
might be attractive to do ESOPs. I am personally not a huge fan of ESOPs for RIAs for two main reasons.
Mm.
And they're connected reasons. And they have to do with ERISA. And we, as financial advisors or former financial advisors, know enough about ERISA to know that how much we actually hate ERISA.
Yeah.
Not because it's bad. I'm actually
So
for
it's very
ERISA.
good, just not for us.
Right. It's not for us for two reasons. For RIA firms, the first is that ESOP plans are ERISA plans. So they fall under ERISA guidelines, which means they are very unflexible. Very
Mhm.
unflexible. What you have to do is laid out in ERISA. There's not a lot of customization and there's not a lot of ability to flex them.
Yeah.
Um,
You
the
follow the rules
second,
just like a 401k plan, or you go to jail and get
exactly,
fined. Yeah, that's it.
exactly. And so they don't always meet the needs of small companies, particularly service industry companies. They were really set up more for manufacturing
Sure.
companies.
Hmm.
Um, The second thing, and as a twist for RIAs, is that ESOP plans actually make companies takeover targets, which I learned, interestingly enough, from the craft beer industry. So there's a lot of small craft breweries that came up in the early 2000s, and a lot of them were started by very socially responsible individuals, and they started ESOP plans to give their employees benefit in the company.
Sure.
The problem with that is that because ESOP plans are ERISA plans, they have ERISA trustees that oversee the ESOP plan. And that means that those ERISA trustees are required under ERISA to accept buyout offers that are financially advantageous.
Wow.
And so
Yeah.
if you are big beer, which is a thing I turned out, I don't drink beer, y'all, but big beer, and you want to acquire a craft brewery, if you find one that has a large ERISA plan and you offer just good enough, you
Wow.
can buy all those shares basically no matter what people think.
That's a big disadvantage. Yes.
Yeah. And so,
Wow. I had no idea. That's insane.
yeah. And the ERISA trustees don't really have an option because that's what ERISA says. The
Yeah.
ERISA
Otherwise,
says
you get sued by the 10 employees who are beneficiaries who really want that to happen. They sue the trustee because
exactly.
they can, and they probably win.
Exactly. They do win because
Wow.
ERISA uses financial metrics only. And so they're required to take the best deal financially for their
Right.
shareholders.
So,
And
like a
so,
benefit corporation, B Corp, and ESOP are actually not very compatible. It sounds like.
not at all, not at all. And there
Wow.
haven't really
Huh.
been a ton of lawsuits about it, but they are relatively uncompatible because
Yeah.
how do you value, right? How do you value those B corporation values against the ERISA mandate to take money and financial power for the shares?
All right.
Especially if Big Beer says, oh no, we're super socially responsible.
All right. I imagine there are some people who are watching who are in the private equity industry in the RIA space who are going to see some of this and they're going to go, oh, I'm going to start looking for ESOP financial advisors because easy takeovers at probably
Yeah,
really
though
low
they're
multiples compared to what they'd have to do for a
mhm,
founder led firm.
true, though there aren't that many of them.
Not many.
So,
That is true for
yeah,
this
not
reason, I
many.
expect. But
Um,
interesting. Wow.
mhm.
Fascinating. Okay.
So don't be an ESOP. So your other options, if you don't want to be an ESOP, don't be an ESOP, friends. And for whatever reason, you don't want to impact the personal bottom line of your employee owners. Your other option is basically a perpetual purpose trust. And that's kind of your only other option. That's actually what we're doing at Adasina. It is a newer version of employee ownership, but it is the one that is gaining a lot of traction. The biggest perpetual purpose trust, I believe, in the world is Patagonia. They changed to a perpetual purpose trust model. And there are about 50 publicly traded companies in the US that are moving towards or have already done perpetual purpose trust. And I'm sorry, I said publicly traded, I meant private companies,
Right.
large private companies that are moving towards perpetual purpose trust models.
Interesting.
If you are familiar with estate planning trusts, it is a very similar concept. You sell, as an owner, you sell or give your shares to a trust entity that is a purpose trust. So it has that B Corp sort of overlay with it. And the beneficiaries of that trust are your current and sometimes former employees. And it is governed by a trust board. So they're sometimes also called employee benefit trusts. And so the shares are held in trust in perpetuity for the benefit of the employees.
So how does when someone leaves the company or joins the company, how does that work?
Absolutely. They become part of what we would call a beneficiary class. So, because they own no shares themselves, it doesn't matter when they start or leave the company, because when they are employed with the company, if let's say our beneficiary are current employees, they get that benefit. What does that benefit look like? It usually looks like something like a profit sharing plan. Because the idea is that the company makes money. And when the company makes money, it can do basically two things with the money. It can reinvest that money back into itself, or it can pay out to its ownership in the form of dividends. Usually, perpetual purpose trust companies are C companies, they're C corporations. So it would pay it conceptually to the trust. The trusts would spend it on its beneficiaries. Its beneficiaries are its the current employees, and so it funds things like pension plans, an increased healthcare coverage amounts, profit sharing distributions, childcare stipends. All those types of things are funded from money that flows from the ownership via the trust.
And that's equal across all beneficiaries, so that if you want to have differential economics, you have to pay it out as salary and bonus, basically.
Basically, there are ways to create sort of subclasses, but it's not really set up for that. It's really
Right.
set up to pay, to just pay out to the beneficiaries. But
Yeah. But you could
especially,
theoretically have like, okay, if your tenure is 10 years or more, then you're this class, and pre 10 years, and you're this class, theoretically.
absolutely, absolutely. And I have also seen it. Um, the thing that was really intriguing to me that I have seen, I've never seen, but I want to do it at Adasina, is that you can have a perpetual purpose trust fund a pension.
Mhm.
And then with a pension, you can basically buy pension credits on behalf of your current and former employees. And so they get that tangibility of that feeling of ownership, but without actually having to own the company. What they
Right. And
just
that
see is
covers
that
your tenure because obviously you've been there for 10 years. You have 10 years of pension
exactly,
contributions. You've been there 1 year, you have 1 year of pension contributions.
exactly. And
You don't
pensions
get to
are
take that
not,
money now, but that's good for a lot of financial advisors anyway, because
mhm,
most financial advisors I know are vaguely kind of, maternalistic about their like wanting to pay people extra. They're like, well, I want to pay people extra, but I'm going to put it in their retirement plan because that's good for them.
absolutely. And I mean, I want to bring back the pension plan. I understand all the reasons why companies moved away from it. I think most of them are bogus. It's a very soft word that I'm using on air. But I want to bring back
You
the
don't
pension
have
plan.
to. We say fuck and shit and all sorts of language on this channel.
JD, I'm a lady. Um, so I would love to, and I plan someday for Adasina's perpetual purpose trust to fund a pension program, and that way I can also benefit both my current and my former employees.
Yeah, no, that's very smart. Very interesting. Well, it sounds like if someone has lots of questions about how to do an employee ownership plan, Maya's the one to call.
You can, you
Um,
can. I will walk you through process.
and
Come on
luckily, you're
over.
consulting now, so you can. It's no longer
Oh
that
my
can I pick your
goodness.
brain for 15 minutes, which um, it was interesting when I started consulting. I had so many people call me and say, "Oh, I can pay you now." Okay, because they didn't want to
Okay,
take up too much of my time, even though I would have given it to them before. And
totally.
now they're like, "Ooh, we can make this for realsies. This is awesome."
Yeah, anytime. I accept. I'm very easy. I accept payment. I'm easy that way. You want my time,
Yeah,
pay for it. Got it.
exactly. Yeah.
Mm,
Now I've moved to the pay what you want model. So uh, I think it's starting to work out really, really well.
excellent.
I just finished an M&A deal where I had a success fee, which is I say, hey, pay me about this much or more if I do a really great job.
Hmm.
And they came back and we agree on a number of like what that target number is. Like, don't pay me less than that unless I really suck. But like this, it's got
Right.
to be this or more.
Hmm.
But again, guidance, you can literally just not pay me and I'm not going to sue you.
Hmm.
But they ended up paying me 4 times the amount that we had talked about initially.
Love that. Oh, so
Why?
you're
Because
buying
I
dinner
crushed it.
next time. You're buying
Oh
dinner
yeah,
next time we get together. Oh
absolutely. I'm
yeah.
buying an excavator is what. But it
Sounds
works
good.
out. So highly recommend it for all of you. Pay what you want works really, really well as long as you
Hmm.
are good. And if you're not
Hmm.
good, then it's maybe not the best choice for you.
No, I would think not, but we're good. We're good.
We're good. We're
Yeah,
so good.
we're great.
So, all you watching, we'll start to wrap up. But if you need help with your firm, particularly around international compliance and employee benefits, Maya's your person. But honestly, I think Maya is one of the great operational thinkers in our industry. So, if any of you are looking for someone to really make the way your firm works on a technical and process level, I don't think there's anyone you should call before you call Maya. That's
Well,
my
thank you.
opinion.
Thank you.
Don't
I
call me
actually
for that kind
agree.
of stuff. That's for
No,
sure.
don't call
'Cause
JD for that. No.
not if
But
you
if you
want
need a
like the
lot of
most
big
efficient process.
ideas,
Yeah.
yeah. If you want a lot of big ideas, not all of which are perfect, but many of which are fascinating, and
Oh
some
yeah.
of which he can bring pretty far before he has to turn them over to me with sadness in his eyes, call JD.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mostly you call me when you're like, I want to do this thing, but it's impossible. I'm like, oh, is it? I have a
You're
magic
like,
wand sitting right
challenge
behind me. I can fix that.
accepted. Challenge
Or if you want to see
accepted.
the future,
Yeah.
also good at that. We have Maya's link here on the screen, so you can go there, or reach out to me, or post a comment, or hit us up both on LinkedIn. I doubt either of us are really accessible on X or Twitter or whatever they call it these days, so don't try
I
that.
know.
But LinkedIn and YouTube both work fine for getting in touch with either of us, or you just saw the website for
It's true.
Lyria. So there you go.
Yeah. And if you want me to come back, JD, maybe if your listeners tell you, if you want me to come back and spend a lot more time walking you through Adasina's journey towards employee ownership and what I learned
Anytime
and
you
why
want.
I
And
was researching craft beer when I don't even drink beer, let me know.
you come back anytime you want. If you want to bring some of your Adasina people who are now going to be the employee owners, I think that could be a really, really
Oh,
cool,
that
cool
could be
show
a really
too.
interesting idea. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
you
could be
have
a
an
really
open
interesting idea.
invitation. You come on anytime you want. We
Well,
don't have a regular
thank you.
schedule, so we can just be here every day talking for 4 hours a day. I'm down.
Okay. No, thank you. Um,
No one has my endurance for being in front of people and being watched. I probably have the highest endurance for that of anyone I know.
weren't you like a theater major in college or something?
Yeah, for my first half of college, I was a theater major until I switched over to economics and accounting, which is pretty
Right, because
typical.
those
That's what
things.
most people do. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. I actually
absolutely.
got a
Yeah.
scholarship because I wrote an essay on that transition because everyone thought that's the weirdest thing they've ever seen. I did, however, for our Student Accounting Society, direct all of our skits for the club. We did a
Oh,
skit
I'm
every
sure
year.
you did.
And man, I can't tell you how hard those accounting jokes hit when you have all the like partners at the big six in the room, because I
Mm-hmm.
was at UCLA. And so they would show up to our like banquet for the club at the end of the year. And we'd have this big ballroom and all the accounting firms would be there. And my wife came to one of those one time and she's just sitting there watching people laugh, like, what is going on? Like nothing here is funny. And
No.
people are literally losing their minds, rolling off their chairs.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. You have jokes about debits and credits are a very limited and you know a
Targeted.
directed bit of humor, very
Yeah,
targeted humor, and
I
but
believe that.
man, it crushed. So I've used my theater skills in many, many ways over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
Well, just not being afraid to talk to people. I mean,
That's
that's always a
look,
huge one.
as long as everyone's looking at me and thinking I'm pretty, I am happy to do it for as long as
Oh,
anyone wants.
honey, you are so pretty. You are so pretty. Yeah.
Thank you, Maya. It
All
was a
right. Thanks,
pleasure as
JD.
always. Thank you very much. I will let you get back to your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for anyone watching and listening, either live now or in the future. And as I said, feel free to reach out to either of us. We are both happy to chat and help you with anything you might need.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.